This week on RuneScape Retold, we take a look at the rise and fall of a legend and what happens when your desire for power grows a little bit too big. Welcome back to RuneScape Retold, the podcast where we dive into the legends and hidden stories of Gilmore. I'm your host, Wimbob, and I'm excited today to peel back the layers of mystery that surround one of the first villains that we ever face in this amazing game. Today, that deep dive is into an infamous vampire, Count Draynor. But what about before he terrorized Draynor Village? What about when he was just a noble in Morytania? Before we jump into the action and the story today, I do want to address the frog in the room, or maybe more specifically, the frog that's currently living in my throat. If you've grown accustomed to the sound of my voice in episodes 1, 2, and 3, you might notice I sound a little different today. I pushed back recording as long as I could, but the voice did not return. And so, I hope that you'll get used to the soothing sounds of this new depth, but not too used to it, because it'll be gone again by next week. This week, we're looking at the Vampire Slayer quest and how we bring an end to the reign of Count Draynor. After this week's quest, we're going to be talking about our creature of the week, where we're going to get murky in the world of swamp crabs. So, without further ado, let's learn about Count Draynor. Or maybe who he was before he was Count Draynor. The vicious and ambitious vampire, Andreas Drakov. You may have noticed that today we're actually bringing together two areas that we've already talked about. One, east of the south, Morytania, where we actually look where Count Draynor had his not-so-humble beginnings in the vampiric nobility of Morytania. And west of the south, specifically Draynor Manor, which we talked about quite a bit in episode 1. Draynor Manor was where Ernest was turned into a chicken, where we heard the ramblings of a madman. But today, instead of focusing upstairs, we're focusing in the basement, where Count Draynor resides. But I started with a question. How did he get there? Why was this vampire so far from his home? And how on earth could we defeat him? So, we start with the fall of Andreas Drakov. Long before Count Draynor claimed Draynor Manor as his own, he was a vampire noble living in Morytania. Though he was a member of a lesser house, Andreas, as we'll be talking about him today, was driven by ambition, looking for a way to claw his way to the top of the strict vampiric hierarchy. He had a sharp mind, and his political cunning earned him a place in the court of Darkmire, the court where Lord Draken ruled with an iron fist, protected by his vicious Firewatch. But Andreas had one fatal flaw. See, he wasn't content to simply be a vampire noble. He saw that the Firewatch held real power, that they were enforcing Draken's will with their brutal efficiency. They could fly, they had enhanced combat abilities, and they were almost invincible without the aid of special weapons, like the Blisterwood Flail, which we'll talk about in a future quest. Andreas despised them for it. He saw their status as the only thing standing between him and ultimate power. And his restlessness and impatience didn't go unnoticed. The vampire nobles began to look at Andreas. They recognized that he was scheming to overthrow them. Andreas wasn't concerned. He didn't want their wings. He didn't want to fly and protect Draken. He wanted so much more. He was pursuing a power that no Firewatch or vampire could ever have held before. And he was going to do it without Lord Draken's blessing, without Lord Draken even knowing about it. Because Andreas had discovered an ancient rite long forgotten by the Firewatch and by their kind. He decided he wasn't going to remain a pawn in Draken's game, and instead, he was going to search for an ancient, forbidden ritual to unlock his strength once and for all. This desire for strength and power led Andreas deep into the dark history of the vampires, where he did indeed uncover an ancient, forbidden ritual. A ritual that promised to unlock the deepest reserves of vampiric strength and ability. But it was a ritual that came with great cost. It was said to be dangerous or even deadly to those who attempted it. And just by making the attempt, he would be shunned by vampiric society. But Andreas, blinded by ambition and drive for power, believed that he, a lowly, noble vampire, could master it. He envisioned a transformation that would make him more powerful than even the Firewatch, that would grant him immortality beyond immortality, that his skin would harden like stone, his strength would increase tenfold, and most importantly, he would gain the ability to manipulate the shadows themselves, allowing him to strike unseen, be a force that couldn't be stopped. It was actually said that whoever completed the ritual would become a creature of unparalleled power, with the ability to control the very essence of life and death. And this desire led him deep into a forgotten chamber beneath Darkmire, standing before a stone altar, with runes etched into it older than Morytania itself. Dark energy crackling in the air, he pulls out a vial of blood, the key ingredient to the ritual. Whispering to himself like a madman ascending into power and craziness, Andreas says, "The blood of 100 souls, sacrificed for my ascension. Their essence will fuel my rise, and with this power I will no longer be bound by Draken's rule. I will never cower before the Firewatch. I will become something more." This began the ritual, a brutal, ancient ritual, carving symbols into his skin, reciting incantations lost to time. And as the dark energy swirled around him, he lifted off the ground. The final words left his lips. He was still for a moment. Andreas felt a surge of power, true power, unlike anything that he had ever known. His muscles tightened, his senses sharpened, and his instincts roared to life. It had worked. Andreas had experienced the true, ancient power of the vampires. And all he could think about was that Draken would finally kneel before him. That he wouldn't be a lowly vampire anymore, but he would be seen as something that needed to be feared and respected. But within minutes, the feeling had gone. The ritual had gone wrong. His body began to shake, and the power was too much for him. Instead of strength and immortality that he had sought, his veins burned as if he was filled with a foreign substance. His skin, rather than hardening like stone, grew fragile, as though the ritual had drained the very power from him. Weak and trembling, Andreas felt the cold stone floor. And it was on that cold stone floor that the Firewatch found him. Playing with dark magic, Strakov, the Firewatch pushed at him. How predictable. He was dragged right into Lord Draken's throne room, just a shadow of who he once was. And Lord Draken looked at this beaten down man and cast him away from Morytania. Exile would suit him better, as he no longer had power, and he had sought to have power beyond his station. And so, stripped of his title, stripped of his power, Andreas Strakov was cast out of Morytania. He wandered the lands beyond the river south, his mind racing with thoughts of revenge, but his body weakened by his failed ritual. Slowly, over the decades, he began to regain strength, and he continued west until he found a place that he would call his own. Under the guise of Count Draynor, he would rebuild his power, preying on the weak villagers, biding his time, and plotting his return to Morytania. He had grown comfortable in his new home of Draynor Manor. He was a shadow of the vampire that he once hoped to become, but even in this weakened state, he held dominion over the village, feeding off its people in the dead of night. His plans for revenge were never realized, but he ruled over Draynor Village with an iron fist. Until one day, a new adventurer entered the picture. As an aside, now that we've covered Count Draynor's tragic tale of failure, let's break down the differences between vampires like him and the Firewatch. Vampires are lower-ranked beings, like Count Draynor, who tend to live outside of Morytania's strict ruling structure. They are powerful in their own right, but they lack the special abilities of the Firewatch as well as some of the direction of serving Lord Draken. Firewatch are elite vampires. They serve directly under Lord Draken. They patrol the skies, they can fly, and are highly resistant to normal attacks. Only special blister-wood weapons can take them down. But they're not just enforcers. The Firewatch are symbols of Lord Draken's dominion over the land of Morytania. As for the hierarchy, Lord Draken rules at the top, with the Firewatch beneath him enforcing his will. Below them are various vampire nobility, and even lower still are outcasts like Count Draynor, who become little more than a footnote in Morytania's history. Our quest begins in a terrified and dark Draynor Village. Fear has filled the hearts of the villagers, and they have been preyed on night after night by a terrible being from the haunted mansion to the north. One terrified villager named Morgan comes across a brave adventurer, that's you, and begs us to find Dr. Harlow in Varrock. Dr. Harlow, this drunken, staggering man, who apparently is the only one capable of giving us the tools and the knowledge to finally put an end to the vampire once and for all. And so the journey begins, walking all the way past Draynor Manor, north to some barbarians who apparently like to make things out of clay and eat beef, over a small bridge with goblins holding their spears. For some reason, nothing attacks us, which is a nice change. Until we come to Dr. Harlow's residence, a bar. As is custom in most quests, we have an interaction with him that involves alcohol, until Dr. Harlow gives us the wooden stake. Like in all versions of vampiric creatures throughout all different forms of media, there are two key things you need to know about our enemy. Garlic is apparently very effective in ruining his limited strength that he does have left, and to actually kill a vampire. It's not enough to cut off their head, or their legs, or their arms. It's not enough to put a sword through them. No, no, no. You need a small wooden stake, hammered in, just as they enter the end of their life. And so, though this journey is not the longest journey we've been on, and the quest isn't the longest quest we're going to do, we make our way back to Draynor Manor. Through the gates, past those lifeless trees that slap us hard, into this large opening door where we're once again greeted by the puppy-like chair. We navigate our way around the staircases into a large, glowing basement. The light coming up is dim yet living. The candlelight is bright enough that we know is where we have to go. But fear begins to well in our chests. Count Draynor, this long-time reign of terror, this being who's been terrorizing so many, is just a few steps away. So, Hands sweating, knees weak, arms heavy. We make our way into the basement. Without a single moment, Count Draynor's voice begins echoing in the cold stone chamber. It's going straight into our minds as he says, "Ah, another lamb sent to the slaughter. You know nothing of true power, mortal." A chill courses down our spine as we lift our stake and our weapon and we go to battle with Count Draynor. Luckily, thanks to the weakness he's felt since his fall in Morytania, to the smear of garlic we rubbed on his cheek, and to the stake in hand, Count Draynor falls. He turns to dust right before our very eyes, and his ambitions end in the same ashes that fueled his downfall from Morytania. With one fell swoop, Count Draynor's long reign of terror comes to an end. From a failed ritual to a failed ruler, Draynor's lust for power ultimately consumed him. And with one swing of a hammer, the village was free at last. And that is the end of Count Draynor's story. He's done. And his desire for power was met only with his end. But that's not the end of the stories of Morytania. That's not the end of Lord Draken. That's not the end of anything of remote power, really. This is just the beginning of our story and our battle against the evil that dwells east of the south. I hope you enjoyed this week's story. And now it's time for our creature of the week. Today we're headed back into those swamps to talk about a sneaky, disguised, rotten little tree with legs, known as a swamp crab. Swamp crabs are native to places like Morytania Swamp and the surrounding areas. But these creatures are unique in their ability to disguise themselves as part of the landscape. They blend in as trees until you get too close. Don't be fooled, because these critters can pack quite the punch. Coming in at a respectable combat level of 60, they can be a little tough to take down. But aside from being ambushing predators, swamp crabs actually drop useful things. They may be annoying in some ways, but they've actually become part of the Swamp Man meta, as they have zero range defense, a lot of HP, and you can sit there for a long time. The coolest thing about these crabs is that they can go completely unnoticed in their environment. They basically don't exist if you haven't fought them on purpose before. And unless you're wandering way to the east of Morytania, you're not really going to run into them by accident. Overall, if you're looking for a new place to kill some crabs because the sand and rocks are getting boring, you can head over to the swamp crabs, throw some knives, and get those range levels up. We don't really know what they are, but I assume they're just a living animal like all the other crabs. But I like to think that maybe, because it's Morytania, they might be something a little more sinister. Just maybe they're a soul bound to a tree that wants to kill you. And that's it for today's episode of RuneScape Retold. From Count Draynor's tragic quest for power, to his downfall, to the lurking dangers of small crab tree beings that aren't good for throwing knives at. We've covered a lot today. If you're enjoying the podcast, be sure to leave a review, thumbs up on YouTube, or a comment. And don't forget to follow or subscribe for more RuneScape stories retold. Until next time, keep your stakes sharp and your wits sharper. So, thanks again for joining us. I'm really enjoying this process. And even though my voice might hurt today, I do genuinely hope that you're enjoying it too. If you've made it this far, you probably have, and it would mean a lot to me if you're able to share this in whatever way you do. Overall, RuneScape Retold's not going anywhere. So, Join me for the long haul, as we're back next time with episode 5. Let him cook.